Madre on Amazon was okay. But before I get into my review of this movie, please consider this your spoiler warning because I will be talking spoilerish-ish. So you've been warned. So this movie was okay. It was kind of boring. I would say the first half of it, and it wants to pick up towards the end, but it's definitely a disappointment. Even though the broader message makes this movie well worth the watch. So it kind of deals with the supernatural, but at the end it has nothing to do with the supernatural, even though there's a supernatural essence or idea to it. So this young couple, her husband is a farmer. She's pregnant and they move to this little town that many believe that it's cursed. And we meet a lot of people from this town, but oddly enough, there is no children. And everyone in the town believes that there is a curse. Now, our female lead does some investigation. She's at home. She's pregnant, had nothing but time. And she figures out that maybe, or there's a news about the pesticides that they are using for farming, and she develops like this weird rash, and she goes on and down this rabbit hole to find out that maybe this pesticide is the reason why a lot of people are not having babies, or maybe it has something to do with the rashes, people dying. So she just starts going down rabbit holes and thinking a bunch of things. And we have the husband that doesn't believe her at first, but then when he starts figuring out like something was just off about it, he starts digging a little deeper and then finds out the hidden truth that there isn't anything wrong with the pesticides, but that his boss basically, and the local doctor are sterilizing Mexican Americans because they can, and they think that Mexicans, I said Mexican Americans, actually just Mexicans, illegal Mexicans, as the movie puts it. And they think of them as a plague, and that since they can't afford to have babies, they are going to forcibly sterilize them so that they don't reproduce and just be our workers, basically. Now, there is a supernatural element to this movie where she sees this woman, Teresa, that we find out that not only her, a lot of the women that were in the town had been sterilized, and willingly. There's a nurse that goes out and says, hey, you know what, either you die or the baby dies, both of you dies, but you got to sign here. And what they were signing is a consent to get sterilized. So they got protected under the law, even though what they were doing was highly illegal. And the female Teresa, which comes out, kind of like Slender Man face. She can't, or at least you don't see the mouth. She's wearing a red dress, and we find out that she died. And I guess there's a poetic justice to this movie where finally, when the criminals are come to justice by dying, and I'll leave it at that. Watch the movie if you're interested in seeing how this movie ends. And finally, she could rest. So there is that sense of justice for some of the females that were in this movie. But then there's a twist at the end that the nurse kind of escapes. So the doctor and the boss both get killed, but the nurse kind of goes away, and we find out at the end that the nurse is continuing the practice. Now, you might think, well, that can't happen. And at the end, if you stay all the way to the end, there is a ton of news clippings along with a news segment from Rachel Maddow where she addresses this in 2020, where a lot of illegal Mexican women that were coming over the border were sterilized against their will. And I give the movie credit for bringing that into the forefront. Now, I've been lucky or unlucky to work in a factory where it was a lot of illegal women that worked in that factory. Now, there was no sterilization of women, but there was definitely rape on women and forcibly making them do sexual acts because they were illegal. And a lot of upper management took advantage of that in saying, hey, if you don't do X, Y, and Z, I'm going to deport you. And a lot of women, since they don't know any better, go ahead and do what they have to do to, keep their piece of the pie, if you would, just to stay here in the States. So I applaud the movie for the message that it's bringing. It does it in a weird way, like I said earlier. It brings a fantastical element into it, or a supernatural element into it, but does bring it at the end. But I thought it was kind of cheapened, only because we find this out in the last probably 10 to 5 minutes. And it throws the movie all over the place, because then you're like, well, what was the point? You should have just made the story about the sterilization about the women, and this movie could have flowed a whole lot better. But again, I give credit where credit is due, because it is a subject that needs to be brought more to light, and people need to be held accountable in many of these instances throughout the last, let's just call it 10, 15 years, probably even more. And not only with Mexicans, it's gone on with other races, this forcibly or the sterilization, because the government believes that they know who is worth and what is not worth. So there's a lot more light should be brought into this message. Now, in saying that, this movie had very bad pacing. Like I said earlier, the first, 30, 40 minutes of this movie was so dragged on, and it tries to pick up, but it doesn't. They rely on jump scares that don't work, that feel out of place, and I don't know. It just didn't go. It didn't flow well. The acting was okay. I did enjoy the mostly all Hispanic cast in this one, and they did a really good job in portraying, I guess, the Mexican farmer experience, even though some of them was the old typical, stereotype that is the Mexican. The score was too grand for this movie, and I know that's a weird thing to bring up in a review, like saying so the score was too good, and it was way too well done, where it felt like it belonged in a superhero movie or a drama. Like, I could see the soundtrack to this movie being like in Fast and Furious 10 or the next Avengers movie. It was that grandiose, where you listen to it and you're like, it doesn't fit the movie that we're watching. Especially with these supernatural movies, you expect more of a suspenseful feel, more of a horror feel, more of a swell to build up. But this one was just so cinematic, it just didn't fit the movie at all. So for this whole movie, I gave it a C. And honestly, what saved it was the message. I was going to do a C- on this review, because there was just too much bad in it than good. But I think the message saves this to just be a C. It's definitely gonna be those that whatever you're tasting. I know some people are gonna think like that's way too high for this movie. This movie should have been an F or a D. And hey, that's your opinion and your right to have it. Some people might think it's actually like a little higher than a C, maybe a C plus, maybe a B minus. And again, you're entitled to your opinion. But for me, this movie was just, it lacked in so many places, even though at the end it does save it just because of the broader message. And anytime you deal with something that sensitive, it's difficult to do it. And I appreciate the artistic form that they were trying to bring. But anyways, those are just my thoughts. I would love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. And like always, that's a wrap.